Magic realism is easily one of the most underrated genres in today's cinema, and many scholars still dispute its legitimacy as a form of storytelling. But to me, this is actually one of the most common and most powerful kinds of narratives and ought to be recognized as such considering how common it is. The very first way I recognized magic realism films was treating it like a dream. Recognize the narrative and the setting and constantly ask yourself, is this normal? Let's run a little experiment on that. In the case of this scene, you might be thinking, okay, bioluminescence at night, pretty normal. Guy stranded at sea, pretty normal. Everything looks good here, but wait a minute, what the f***? Okay, yeah, something is off. It turns out that the reason many scholars don't accept magic realism as a legitimate genre is because they think existing definitions are too broad. I would argue that they're simply outdated, but they aren't wrong in recognizing that there is a disconnect in what we view as acceptable films for this category. It's like the scholar Jean-Pierre Dury states, commentators have used the term magic realism to refer to so many different works of art that the term has largely lost its value for making distinctions between genres. Interesting point, Mr. Dury. Let's fix that. In the next few minutes, we're going to look at 3 of the most widely recognized definitions of magic realism, figure out which points are antiquated for the modern films using the genre, and see if we can establish a new age magic realism definition. And I should preface this by saying that I mean no disrespect to the opinions or beliefs of the scholars mentioned in this video, but I need a good grade in my film history course and I'm in a fighting mood, so I'm down for a little academic quarreling. Alright, let's go. Okay, so for some background, it's important to know that the term magic realism was coined by the art critic Franz Roh in 1925 and served as a way to differentiate the aesthetic qualities that made up non-objective paintings across other art forms like literature and music and film. At this point, the term was adopted by Latin American writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Alejo Carpenter. Magic realism quickly spread through Latin America as a way of expressing the American mentality infused with the supernatural and developing an independent, autonomous genre. This is where we see the first scholarly discrepancy. See, some scholars argue that the term magic realism can only be applied to works coming from Latin America since that's where most development of the art came from. In reality though, works of art with the same aesthetic qualities and narratives quickly spread into the international scope, showing that Latin America didn't have a monopoly on the genre. In the book Magic Realism Rediscovered 1918 to 1981, we see perhaps the first widely accepted definition of magic realism by Seymour Menton. Although his list of 7 characteristics was largely pointed towards painting, they've been used to describe other art forms within the same genre. Let's see what's still applicable. Number 1. Ultra-sharp focus. Menton believed that magic realist painting needed to have a strong and obvious point of focus. Applying this to narrative structures, he believed that a narrative needed an obvious point, but we know now that that isn't necessarily true. See, one might finish watching Pan's Labyrinth and say, ah yes, of course. Magic realism aided a heartbreaking narrative and taught me that in a war-torn world of good and evil, there is no place for innocence. They might then watch Birdman and leave thinking, I have no idea what the that was about. But it doesn't necessarily change the fact that they were both realistic narratives aided by a fantasy to tell a deeper story. Number 2. Objectivity. Menton argues that magic realism art portrays people, landscapes, and still life with an apparent objectivity that eliminated the presence of the artist. I'm gonna agree with him with this one. Think about the deadpan delivery of Wes Anderson's quirky characters or the emotional distance we keep from Lars von Trier's characters despite having a voyeuristic view into the most personal parts of their lives. Number 3. Coldness. This term is kind of ambiguous, but within it, Menton claims that magic realism has to appeal to the intellect and not emotion. I couldn't disagree stronger here. One of the benefits of magic realism is to take a highly personal and intimate story and elevate its characteristics through the application of fantasy. While magic realism is often seen as a highbrow heyday for hipster trash like me, it doesn't have to be cold, distant, and intellectual to be cool. One of the reasons I love magic realism films is that they can be immensely emotional, and we shouldn't discredit that. Number 4. Center peddle. If I'm being honest, I have no idea what Seymour Menton meant by this term, but if I continue my trend of stomping on respected academics with my naive worldview, I'd guess that he's saying the story has a central theme, and that causes elements of the film to follow a path towards it, meaning that while not all elements point directly back to the themes, they are swayed and affected by them. That sounds reasonable to me, so I'll agree with him. Number 5. Effacement of the painting process. yeah, this one doesn't really apply to us. Number 6, naivete. Spot on, Seymour. In almost all widely accepted magic realism films, the characters seem to present a front of innocence and coolness in the face of danger, or in the fact that they're experiencing the supernatural in the first place. Take for instance Pan's Labyrinth. I would be booking it in the opposite direction if I saw a creature like this, but Ophelia's innocence leads her to her curiosity. Or in Being John Malkovich, all of the other characters are naive enough and somehow accept the strange fact that the title character works on floor 7.5 of their building. Number 7, representational. This is perhaps one of the most important distinctions of magic realism. The fantastical elements aren't arbitrary and for entertainment. They exist to represent ideas already present in the story, but in a supernatural form. Magic realism is based on the representation of what is possible, but not probable. So, what do other scholars have to say on the subject? Well, that one dude from earlier, Jean-Pierre Dury, who thinks that magic realism is too vague to be a genre, actually gave one of the other best definitions. According to our most restrictive definition of the term, the magic realist aims at a basis of mimetic illusion while destroying it regularly with a strange treatment of time, space, characters, or what many people consider the basic rules of the physical world. Interesting. Let's compare that to Black Swan. Strange treatment of time. Check. Strange treatment of characters. Check. Strange treatment of the basic rules of the physical world. Yeah, maybe just a little bit weird. Okay, we've got one more great definition, this time by Maggie Ann Bowers, who is the author of the book Magical Realism. The magic realist film acts as a means of initiating questions concerning philosophical issues such as the existence of God, the role of fate, and the idea of self that extends beyond the film's capacity to divert and entertain. Wait a second. Homegirl Maggie thinks that we should absolutely include larger-than-life elements in our films, but only as a way to make us think, as opposed to turn us into lifeless puppets to be entertained for 2 hours? Interesting concept. Somebody should tell Michael Bay. So, with all these definitions in mind, I can see why scholars have a hard time identifying where magic realism fits among other genres. However, I think one of the most poignant syntheses of these scholarly definitions was made by Martin R. Hall of York St. John University, who argues that magic realism is so effective because it offers a more readily acceptable alternative to the harsh realities of life. Let that sink in for a moment. Isn't that why we've always loved stories in the first place? It's a more acceptable alternative to the harsh realities of life? Magic realism only elevates that. You know, we all struggle with childhood memories, workplace dullness, lifelong dreams, evil beyond our grasp, and failed pasts. Magic realism lets us confront all of these realities, but still find a way to escape from them and find meaning. Now that's a good use of cinema. Thanks for watching.